Your 15 years here are officially over." He delivered the sentence as if he were handing me a receipt for a cup of coffee, rather than executing a career that spanned nearly 2 decades. It was his very first day on the job, and this fresh graduate of some elite business school factory, our newly minted chief financial officer named Julian, was already swinging his administrative ego around like a toddler who had just stumbled upon his father's toolbox. He did not even bother to offer me a seat. I was 48 years old, and I had weathered storms that would have made this kid weep under his mahogany desk. I smiled at him. It was a real, calm, incredibly smooth smile. I looked him dead in the eye and said, "Good luck with the quarterly reports, Julian." "Security will escort you out of the building," he added, puffing out his chest and gesturing vaguely toward the door, as if I might suddenly lunge for a stapler or a stack of printer paper. I told him that was perfectly fine, just as soon as I logged out of my workstation. In truth, I did not need to log out. Every critical component of my daily operations was heavily encrypted, automatically scheduled, and intrinsically bound to the central operating system. My digital calendar entries were impeccably clean, and my personal files were neatly zipped and archived in a secure local drive. There was no formal exit interview. There was no company-wide farewell email sent from Human Resources detailing my many contributions. There was just a polite, slightly awkward nod exchanged with the burly security guard by the lobby doors, a man who frankly looked far more embarrassed by the entire situation than I felt. I hit the sun-baked asphalt of the parking lot, feeling like a ghost effortlessly slipping out of its own skin. 15 years of late nights, sustained by nothing but stale vending machine dinners and black coffee. 15 years of corporate budgets held together by sheer willpower and my deteriorating sanity. So, when Mr. New Money started indiscriminately swinging his administrative axe, without taking even a moment to check the deep, intertwined roots of the corporate tree, well, let us just say I left significantly more than my sarcastic coffee mug behind in that office. I left them a massive invisible ticking clock. I left them a profound silence coded in thousands of rows and columns, patiently waiting for the precise moment to speak. And in just a few short days, I knew with absolute certainty that the silence was going to transform into a deafening scream. The heavy plastic of my security badge clinked softly as I dropped it onto the polished reception desk in the Human Resources department. I adjusted my grip on the single cardboard box I had packed. I had never bothered with inspirational desk plaques or framed pictures of fake vacation smiles. My box contained only the ceramic mug, my personal wireless mouse, which was mine and not company-issued, and a small, delicate origami crane that a stressed coworker had folded for me during the absolute hell of the third-quarter reporting period 3 years ago. It was a stupid little piece of paper, and I cherished it deeply. As I walked down the main aisle passing the accounting division, I saw Gregory lean out of his gray cubicle. His tired eyes flicked nervously from the cardboard box in my arms to my calm face, and then darted toward the new chief financial officer's glass office door down the hall. Downstairs in the expansive main lobby, the veteran security guard, Raymond, did not even bother to stand up from his stool. He simply tilted his bald head, looked at me for a long, heavy second, and softly asked if I was good. I told him I was golden, shifting the weight of the box under my left arm. The heavy glass doors hissed open, granting me exit. The bright sunlight hit my face, accompanied by the chaotic noise of city traffic and the distant sound of a woman angrily yelling at someone over a contested parking spot. For a decade and a half, no one else in the entire organization had even bothered to ask how the engine worked. They simply demanded their pretty bar graphs and their aggressive market projections, slapped them into a slick slideshow, and boldly called it their own strategic innovation. I unlocked my modest sedan, tossed the cardboard box onto the passenger seat, and watched the towering corporate headquarters shrink in my rearview mirror. I was feeling nothing but an immense, deep well of calm. I was not even remotely bitter. I was just profoundly aware. The forecasting platform was hard-coded and scheduled to self-lock in exactly 48 hours if no valid biometric credential activity was detected by the core servers. So I drove directly home, cracked open a cold soda from the refrigerator, and immediately opened my personal laptop. I did not open it to check my corporate email. I had already silently forwarded anything legally useful or personally relevant to my secure private archive hours before the firing. No, I opened my machine to monitor the external server logs. At exactly 43 minutes past 2 in the afternoon, the system logged an attempted access to the core predictive model. The result flashed on my screen. Access denied. Total attempts: 3. Reboot trigger initiated. The fundamental problem with men like Julian, the ones who dangerously mistake positional authority for actual technical ability, is that they genuinely believe unearned confidence is a perfectly acceptable substitute for competence. By the time Monday morning rolled around, he was already aggressively booking the main executive conference room for the highly anticipated quarterly board review scheduled for Thursday. He was puffed up and strutting around the office like he had personally invented the concept of double entry accounting. According to my friends still on the inside, he sent out a remarkably smug little corporate email to the entire finance division, expressing how incredibly excited he was to present his very first quarterly update to the board of directors. Meanwhile, buried deep within the complex bowels of the company's server logs, the digital cracks were already rapidly forming. The automated security monitoring system flagged the main forecasting model twice. The first flag occurred late Sunday night, and the second alert fired early Monday morning, displaying vague, unhelpful little warnings like unexpected formula behavior and critical credential mismatch. The lower-level technicians dutifully opened an internal support ticket and properly escalated it to the Tier 2 help desk. The warning alerts were all sitting there in plain, undeniable text. Forecast model main locked. Requires biometric sequence clearance. Backup utility inaccessible. Credentials completely expired. Administrative override attempt firmly rejected. The technical language was incredibly dry and emotionless, but I could vividly hear the rising panic buried underneath the formal syntax legacy software. That was exactly what he called the incredibly complex, brilliant thing that was currently keeping the board of directors from screaming in financial terror. Every single year, that specific forecasting model painstakingly took raw global sales data, customer churn metrics, complicated international tax shifts, unpredictable supplier volatility indices, and nearly 3 decades of nuanced behavioral indicators, and miraculously turned it all into something the board could easily digest in 5 simple bullet points and a colorful pie chart. The system did not just passively exist. It actively learned, adapted, and predicted. And now, thanks to his arrogant oversight, it was completely and utterly locked. The glaring issue for the company was that there were only ever 2 authorized systems architects in the history of the firm. One of them had happily retired to Florida in the year 2020. The other one, me, was currently standing in a sunny kitchen, baking a loaf of fresh banana bread and softly humming along to a classic rock album. Julian still had not called my phone. He still had not even publicly acknowledged to his superiors that anything was terribly wrong. But in the private corporate messaging channels, the frantic whispers were already starting to spread like a wildfire. Thursday arrived. At exactly 42 minutes past 7 in the morning, inside the cavernous executive conference room, where the walls were made of expensive soundproof glass, but the strategic thinking was rarely transparent, the young chief financial officer was desperately trying to force open the forecast model for a final, critical pre-meeting review. His nervous assistant had already carefully placed the presentation tablet directly in front of him. The expensive ceiling projector was humming gently, patiently waiting to display 12 months of meticulously future-proofed financial clarity to the powerful gods of the boardroom. Julian forcefully tapped the screen. He waited in agonizing silence. He tapped it again, harder this time. The large screen abruptly went pitch black, and then aggressive red text violently bloomed across the center of the display, loud, bright, and completely unapologetic. Access denied. Meanwhile, exactly 6 floors below the executive suite, the core information technology team had already witnessed the frantic lockout attempt. Hell, they had actively watched 6 consecutive failed attempts register on their monitoring software in the last hour alone. 3 desperate attempts came directly from Julian, 2 clumsy attempts originated from the senior finance leads, and one wildly misguided attempt came from someone in the marketing department who foolishly thought maybe just aggressively refreshing the main dashboard would magically fix everything. Spoiler alert for the marketing team, it absolutely did not fix a damn thing. Back upstairs in the tense conference room, Julian took a very long, very deep breath and forced a painfully fake smile. He tried to project an aura of total control, acting like he was still calmly holding the steering wheel, despite the obvious fact that the corporate car was currently engulfed in flames and rapidly accelerating toward a massive cliff. He confidently lied to the room full of highly paid executives who were arriving early for the meeting, loudly declaring that it was merely a minor technical glitch. He smoothly dismissed the glaring red warning as just some outdated permissions acting up, claiming that this sort of thing happens all the time in older legacy systems. Legacy. There was that insulting word again. He used it like it was my middle name, completely ignoring the reality that it was his only remaining lifeline. 42 minutes past 7 in the morning. Unauthorized credential utilized. 43 minutes past 7. Multi-factor validation absolute failure. 45 minutes past 7. Administrative override strictly blocked due to biometric mismatch. The absolute best part of the entire spectacle was that each time the core system aggressively rejected their clumsy intrusion attempts, it meticulously logged the specific device identification number and prominently attached a delightful, time-stamped header that read, "Escalation path requires authorized architect." Back at the towering headquarters, the tension finally reached a boiling point when someone in the room finally dared to ask the crucial question aloud. Who exactly built this complex thing in the first place? A heavy, suffocating silence instantly fell over the room. Julian clenched his square jaw so tightly I imagine his teeth ached. He firmly stated that his team was handling it. Handling it. Sure they were. The reality was that he still had not called my phone. At exactly 2 minutes past 9 in the morning, the atmosphere in the executive boardroom was incredibly thick. The large room smelled heavily of expensive polished leather, the sharp tang of nervous sweat, and the specific kind of palpable desperation that you only ever witness when incredibly rich people suddenly realize their massive wealth might not be multiplying on the aggressive schedule they demanded. The quarterly board meeting had officially commenced. The premium dark roast coffee was poured into delicate cups, the expensive catered pastries remained entirely untouched, and the massive high-definition screen mounted directly behind the struggling chief financial officer still loudly screamed the same message, "Access denied." Authorized user required. Julian, visibly slick with performance anxiety but desperately trying to hold on to his crumbling composure, like a man wearing a rented tuxedo in a rainstorm, forced a hollow chuckle. He waved his hand dismissively and smoothly lied, claiming it was just a minor technical hiccup. He assured the glaring board members that they were merely experiencing some short-term technology issues with the older legacy forecasting tools. He then proudly offered to walk them through some provisional data he had personally compiled over the past 24 hours. He nervously clicked his expensive presentation remote to advance to the next slide. A wealthy venture capital partner, dialing into the meeting via a secure video link from a sprawling luxury villa in the Cayman Islands, unmuted his microphone. He aggressively asked why the bright red error screen currently displayed on the shared video feed prominently featured a specific employee's name. He zoomed his high-resolution camera in on the shared screen feed like he was carefully reading a federal arrest warrant. He demanded an explanation for the silence. Julian swallowed hard again, his confident facade completely shattering. I clicked deep into the administrative logs to review Julian's recent mobile phone activity. The sheer volume of his panic was truly delightful to witness. He had just frantically called Linda, the head of operations. Then he immediately called Gregory over in the supply chain division. Then, in an act of pure desperation, he even called Sarah in the human resources department. He was systematically calling mid-level manager after mid-level manager, desperately fishing for information while pathetically trying to be discreet. He was leaving hurried voicemails, asking if anyone happened to have my personal cell phone number. He casually asked if anyone had heard from me recently. a totally informal operational bottleneck. That was the ridiculous, sanitized corporate phrase they were desperately using to describe the complete paralysis of a billion-dollar enterprise. Meanwhile, I was happily polishing off the last bites of my delicious oatmeal and slowly starting to assemble a massive 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle that I had been putting off completing. Since the year 2021, I felt absolutely no rush. Let them sweat through their expensive tailored suits. Back in the heavily air-conditioned boardroom, the chief executive officer's aging face had gone completely tight. Julian hesitated, his voice trembling slightly as he attempted to form a coherent defense. He stammered that it was merely an administrative oversight, but quickly added that I had not yet been officially contacted to resolve the issue. He foolishly admitted that he thought it was best not to escalate the situation externally without following proper internal protocol. One of the senior board members forcefully slammed a heavy fist onto the table and loudly muttered that the board itself was the only protocol that mattered. Suddenly, expensive smartphones all around the large table started vibrating intensely. Furious, whispered side conversations rapidly erupted like popcorn violently popping in a hot pan. The demands flew across the room. Get him on the phone immediately. Do we even possess his current contact information? Did the legal department formally sign off on this disastrous termination? Why in the hell was this massive single point of failure not clearly flagged for review before this meeting? By exactly 37 minutes past 10 in the morning, the chief executive officer had heard more than enough panicked whispers and witnessed enough blatant incompetence to start a massive corporate storm. Richard had spent the last agonizing hour sitting perfectly still at the head of the long mahogany table, silently watching his newly hired chief financial officer desperately spin a pathetic, second-rate circus act composed of half-finished presentation slides, recycled corporate talking points, and meaningless buzzwords duct-taped together with wild, unfounded speculation. But the exact moment Richard's private phone sharply buzzed with an urgent, highly classified message from the senior legal counsel, everything changed. The subject line of the secure message simply read, "Critical alert. No documentation found regarding forecast system intellectual property ownership." Inside his expansive private corner office, Richard did not angrily pace the floor, nor did he loudly shout at his assistants. He simply stood completely still, staring intensely out the massive floor-to-ceiling window with his jaw clenched incredibly tight. He watched a contracted landscaping crew casually dig decorative trenches in the manicured lawn below, fully realizing the dark irony that the company's own vital financial forecasting infrastructure currently lay 6 feet under the digital dirt. He forcefully pressed the button on his intercom and demanded that the director of information technology be put on the line immediately. When Rachel answered, Richard did not waste time with pleasantries. Rachel continued, her voice unwavering as she delivered the technical facts. She explained that his unique profile was still hard-coded as the primary systems architect. The core logic was heavily encrypted with military-grade security and irrevocably tied to a two-factor biometric authentication process that resided exclusively on his personal, physical keychain device. There were absolutely no secondary backups, no hidden administrative backdoors, and no secondary authorization protocols. Richard absorbed the crushing reality in total silence. Richard slowly ended the phone call, sat down heavily in his ergonomic leather chair and stared blankly at the dark screen of his phone, like it might suddenly grow legs and sprint away to avoid bearing the immense blame for this disaster. He slowly pulled up my old, archived employee file on his private monitor. He carefully read the very last performance note entered on my permanent record. The note described me as quiet, highly reliable, extremely systems-minded, and noted a tendency to intensely hoard technical responsibilities. The previous manager had recommended generic delegation training. Gregory from the supply chain division even sent me a humorous animated image of a massive dumpster fire with a short, highly amusing caption that read, "Guess exactly what the big bosses are watching in the boardroom today." I laughed out loud, genuinely amused by the absolute chaos I had legally orchestrated. Then I securely logged back into the heavily encrypted shadow node and carefully checked the raw access logs one more time. The core situation had not changed at all. The system still displayed the exact same string of failed login attempts, the exact same blazing red security locks, and the exact same impenetrable walls. But then, I noticed the metadata log had registered a highly significant new entry. A specific query had been explicitly flagged. I could vividly imagine the frantic questions rapidly piling up in Richard's mind like unpaid invoices jamming a broken printer tray. Why didn't the IT department mandate a clone of his access credentials? Why was there absolutely no disaster recovery protocol in place for this specific architecture? Who in their right mind approved the termination of a senior architect without executing a massive, heavily documented knowledge transfer? The unvarnished answers were incredibly simple, yet devastating. The company lacked backups because I personally built, maintained, and operated everything, and absolutely no one ever possessed the intellectual curiosity or the operational foresight to ask how it functioned. Now, they desperately needed me. It was just after 8 o'clock in the evening when the phone rang again. It was the specific kind of quiet evening that almost hums with peaceful energy. The dishwasher was softly sloshing water in the kitchen, a gentle wind was lightly brushing against the heavy curtains, and the old house occasionally creaked, remembering that someone lived inside it. I was exactly halfway through a very expensive glass of dark red wine. My feet were comfortably propped up on the coffee table, a warm blanket draped over my lap, when the phone buzzed. There was no caller ID name, just that sterile, glowing gray box of a blocked number that only ever means one of two distinct things: an annoying spam caller, or an incredibly powerful person finally swallowing their massive pride. I let it ring once. I let it ring twice. He exhaled a long, heavy breath into the receiver. He admitted that the entire board of directors was still sitting in the building. He confessed that they had been waiting for hours, and the only piece of data they could successfully pull up from the multi-million-dollar forecasting model was my name glowing in bright red, with two terrifying words displayed underneath: access denied. He paused again, the silence thick with desperation, and simply commanded, "Explain." I did not answer him right away. I calmly looked out my living room window. A neighbor was peacefully walking their golden retriever. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my dark wine. I let the heavy silence stretch out again over the cellular connection. I was not doing it to be petty, and I was not doing it to be cruel. I was simply giving the sheer gravity of the situation the massive space it required to breathe. I spoke slowly and clearly. I told him that his brilliant new chief financial officer made a drastic operational call without conducting a single ounce of due diligence. I reminded him that he, the CEO, had blindly trusted this inexperienced kid to aggressively streamline a complex architecture he fundamentally did not understand. I stood up from the comfortable couch, walked slowly to the large window, and watched the golden retriever enthusiastically sniffing at a metal storm drain. The night outside was perfectly quiet, but I could vividly feel the intense, burning heat of 20 furious boardroom eyes located in another part of the city, all desperately waiting on my voice like it was the only source of oxygen in the room. I stated my terms with absolute clarity. I told him there would be absolutely no more under-the-table nonsense. No intermediaries, no discreet human resources outreach, and no lowball offers. I demanded that if he wanted this massive problem permanently fixed, we were going to do it exactly right. The agreement must be official, heavily documented, and completely legally binding. Then we moved to the critical topic of compensation. I smiled a cold smile into the empty room. I told him we would be discussing a massive, unprecedented performance clause, a legally binding clause that accurately reflected my actual, undeniable value to the survival of the enterprise. Not just the low-tier salary band that human resources mistakenly thought the market dictated. There was a long pause on the line, followed surprisingly by a very soft, defeated chuckle from the most powerful man in the company. He quietly agreed, stating that my terms were entirely fair. Through the phone's microphone, I could clearly hear heavy wooden chairs loudly scraping against the floor in the background. I could hear powerful people nervously murmuring to each other. The very next morning, I absolutely did not rush my routine. I did not plan a triumphant, slow-motion strut through the grand lobby, and there were no dramatic, hard-heeled footsteps aggressively echoing off the expensive marble floors to announce my arrival. I simply wore comfortable, pressed slacks, a dark, understated sweater, and executed a perfectly calm, unremarkable walk through the main corporate lobby, acting exactly like I had never even left the premises. Because, in all the fundamental ways that actually mattered to the survival of the business, my presence had never truly departed. The elevator doors silently parted to reveal floor 23, the exclusive executive level. Stepping onto the plush carpet felt like walking directly into an open, bleeding wound. The expansive hallway violently buzzed with frantic, hushed whispers. Junior assistants were practically sprinting down the corridors, clutching file folders to their chests and moving erratically like they were actively dodging invisible sniper fire. When I finally grasped the heavy brass handle and confidently stepped into the main executive boardroom, the chaotic energy in the room instantly snapped into silence like a violently overstretched rubber band. Julian was already seated at the very far end of the massive table. I simply nodded my head, calmly walked to the table, set down my personal laptop, and clicked the lid open without a shred of unnecessary fanfare. The expensive ceiling projector hummed to life directly behind me, washing the dark room in a clean, pale blue glow. I spoke with a steady, perfectly clear voice, promising the powerful people in the room that I would not waste a single second of their highly valuable time. I explicitly told them that they were all sitting in this room panicking because the core forecasting system had completely failed to load. I clarified, however, that the system did not crash, and it was absolutely not suffering from a software bug. I looked directly at the board members and stated that the system did precisely what I had painstakingly designed it to do. I clicked the remote again. I pointed a laser pointer directly at a glowing red square prominently featured on the complex diagram. I explained that the red square represented the ultimate security protocol, a system I had personally built from scratch immediately following the terrifying internal data breach of 2019, when a rogue executive desperately tried to falsify the second quarter revenue numbers to illegally inflate their personal performance bonuses. I heard several low, uncomfortable murmurs ripple through the boardroom. I reminded them that I was explicitly, directly asked by the board to ensure that such a catastrophic failure would never, ever happen again. I clicked the remote a third time. I boldly pulled up the raw security audit log for the entire room to see. The screen displayed 17 completely failed access attempts, complete with exact timestamps, specific device identification numbers, and the final, glaring red banner they had all stared at yesterday morning in horror. The banner proudly read, "Access denied. Authorized architect required." Then, I slowly turned my body to directly face the powerful men and women seated at the table. Julian looked like he was literally melting into his expensive leather chair. He stammered, his voice sounding as dry as old chalk, claiming it was just a standard departmental restructuring. He pathetically attempted to defend himself by stating he was explicitly told to streamline operations and cut unnecessary costs. Richard's voice suddenly cut through the air, sharp and absolutely unforgiving. He loudly declared that the termination was absolutely never authorized at the executive board level. He accused Julian of failing to even brief the chief executive on the drastic personnel move. Another furious board member leaned aggressively forward, placing both hands on the table, and loudly summarized the sheer stupidity of the situation. I confidently declared that I possessed the archived emails to absolutely prove my claims. I clicked the remote one final time. Boom. The massive screen instantly filled with a cascade of highly incriminating inbox receipts, perfectly time-stamped, clearly showing the exact chain of command, proving every single word I had just spoken. Absolutely no one in the room attempted to defend the young executive. Richard finally broke the suffocating silence, his voice low and completely final. He simply stated, "This is done." Julian did not even make it completely out of the carpeted hallway before his fate was permanently sealed. Before the board of directors could even attempt to move on to the next agenda item, Richard quickly stepped to the heavy wooden door and called out after him, his voice as sharp as broken glass. He told Julian there was one more thing. The entire boardroom went completely still, holding its collective breath. Julian slowly turned around, his posture already wilting, his expensive designer suit suddenly looking far too big for the incredibly small man inside it. Richard looked him dead in the eyes and delivered the fatal blow, stating loudly and clearly that Julian was completely done, effective immediately. Richard slowly closed the heavy boardroom door and turned his full attention back to me. He politely stated that he believed they owed me a very highly lucrative conversation. I simply nodded my head in agreement. My laptop remained open on the table, the small digital cursor steadily blinking on the screen like it was patiently waiting for my explicit permission to save their company. Richard spoke formally, stating that the company would like to officially offer me immediate reinstatement. He promised a massive elevation to a highly senior role, allowing me to choose my exact executive title. I slowly reached down and confidently clicked a few specific keys on my keyboard, entering the complex biometric override sequence. The massive projector screen quickly flickered and then beautifully filled with the soft, highly familiar blue interface of the predictive dashboard. The system loaded perfectly, absolutely seamlessly. The complex financial charts instantly bloomed across the screen like vibrant spring flowers emerging after a brutal, freezing frost. The critical revenue arcs, the complex customer churn curves, the intricate expense deltas, they were all exactly where they needed to be. The entire system was alive, incredibly accurate, and fully awake. The entire board of directors collectively exhaled a massive sigh of relief in perfect unison, sounding remarkably like a single, massive, terrified organism finally drawing a breath of fresh air. And I, remaining perfectly calm, still incredibly steady, closed the lid of my laptop with a very soft, satisfying click. I picked up my device and slowly walked over to the completely empty, highly plush leather chair situated at the very head of the massive table. It was officially my seat now. I smiled a genuine, victorious smile. Let us finally get those quarterly reports completely finished, shall we? There were absolutely no loud cheers and no dramatic applause, just heads nodding. True respect had been forcefully earned, absolutely not gifted. They had foolishly attempted to permanently erase me from the ledger. Now, I was the absolute only name that truly mattered in the entire building.